By this time, I have children, and I think that is when I really started seeing my brokenness.
Ever wonder what happens when the woman standing behind a gospel powerhouse finally decides to share her side of the story? For years, Debra Winans was known by a label that seemed to overshadow everything else about her. She was Bebe Winans' wife, the supportive churchwoman, the devoted mother, and the person holding things together while one of gospel music's biggest names traveled the world collecting awards, praise, and hit records. To the public, everything looked polished and picture-perfect. The smiles were there, the success was undeniable, and the family image seemed strong. But behind that carefully presented picture was a woman dealing with struggles that few people could see. While the spotlight followed BB everywhere he went, Debra was quietly carrying her own challenges away from public view. Debra first became known to many people through her relationship with Benjamin "Bebe" Winans, one of the most famous voices in gospel music history. Bebe came from Detroit's legendary Winans family, a name that became gospel royalty through music, faith, ministry, and strong Christian values.
Early. However, because when we got married, when we came back from our honeymoon, they went right into the studio. The success of the albums happened so fast. It was happening so fast. I didn't know which way was up. It was happening.
His success with his sister, Cece Winans, helped reshape contemporary gospel music during the late 1980s and early 1990s, turning them into household names. The numbers spoke for themselves, albums sold by the millions, awards kept stacking up, churches celebrated their achievements, and mainstream audiences welcomed them with open arms. As BB's fame continued to rise, Debra found herself fading further into the background. The couple married in 1987, right as BB and Cece's crossover success was taking off in a major way. Everything moved at such a fast pace that Debra barely had a chance to process the whirlwind unfolding around her. Almost as soon as the honeymoon ended, BB was back in the studio and fully focused on work. The momentum behind his career seemed impossible to slow down. Record deals with Capitol Records came rolling in, tours grew bigger, and new opportunities appeared one after another at lightning speed. Debra later explained that the success arrived with such force that she kept telling herself the hectic pace was only temporary. She believed that after the next big accomplishment, things would finally settle down and the marriage would have more room to breathe. But that moment never seemed to arrive. Instead, every new achievement brought even more demands. The schedule became busier, the travel increased, and the distance between their personal lives and family life appeared to grow wider with each passing year. Throughout the marriage, Debra embraced the role she felt church culture expected from the wife of a pastor or gospel artist. She supported BB both publicly and privately, often putting her own goals on the back burner. She later revealed that she intentionally set aside parts of her own identity because she believed her responsibility was to help BB achieve his dreams. Behind the scenes, she became heavily involved in helping support and manage different parts of his growing career. She handled fan club correspondence, helped organize industry events, and paid close attention to audience reactions during performances. After shows, she would share that feedback with BB and offer insight from what she had observed. She was not just standing on the sidelines showing support, she was actively helping build and support a growing career behind the scenes. Yet despite all the effort she poured into it, the deeper emotional connection she longed for seemed out of reach. The more she gave, the more she felt something important was still missing.
Secular arena, it just happened so fast. But then I just started feeling like, okay, well, let him get through this success part. Let him get through this first. Then the album went platinum, Just the more success you have, the more work you have to do.
Over time, that silence became part of who she was. Debra later explained that certain church teachings played a major role in why she stayed quiet for so long. She had learned that faithful wives were expected to endure difficulties, pray harder, bless their homes, and trust that God would work things out. In many religious settings, openly discussing marital struggles could feel uncomfortable or even discouraged. Rather than directly addressing feelings of emotional distance, she threw herself even deeper into her faith. She prayed constantly, sought spiritual guidance, and waited for a breakthrough she hoped would change the situation. But while she remained committed to that path, frustration continued to build because the problems she was facing did not seem to improve. At one point, Debra admitted she became increasingly upset because she felt that years of prayer should have led to noticeable progress in the marriage. Eventually, she came to believe that spiritual practices alone could not solve communication issues that both partners needed to address together. It was a difficult realization, and the emotional strain only became more complicated after the birth of their children. Debra and Bebe eventually welcomed their daughter, Maya Destiny Winans, and later their son, Benjamin Winans Jr. From the outside, the growing family seemed to reflect everything people admired: faith, stability, success, and strong family values. To church audiences and gospel music fans, they appeared to be the picture of a thriving Christian household, balancing family life, ministry, and a successful music career. Behind closed doors, however, Debra later shared that becoming a mother intensified feelings she had been trying to push aside for years. She believed that having children would naturally bring a deeper sense of closeness to the marriage. In her mind, parenthood would slow the pace of life, strengthen family bonds, and create the emotional connection she had been hoping for.
People didn't get to know me, and I was standing in the shadow. However, it wasn't standing in the shadow because I didn't want to be seen. I felt that my responsibility was to push him and to support him and to help him reach his goals to the best of my ability.
She expected the experience of raising children together to improve communication, encourage greater emotional support, and make home life feel more united. Instead, she gradually realized that the emotional gap she felt had not disappeared. In some ways, it became even more noticeable because family responsibilities highlighted challenges that had already been there for years. As she focused on raising the children, Debra increasingly felt like she was carrying many of the emotional burdens on her own. Balancing motherhood while navigating the non-stop demands connected to Bebe's growing career created a level of loneliness that was difficult to describe publicly. She later said that despite being surrounded by family, ministry, and professional success, she often felt isolated. The situation became even more difficult when she faced one of the most physically challenging periods of her life, adding another layer of strain to an already complicated chapter of the marriage. Debra later revealed that she went through a traumatic pregnancy and ultimately required an emergency cesarean section during the birth of her daughter. The experience had a major impact on her, both physically and emotionally. In her view, a moment that serious would naturally bring a husband and wife closer together and shift attention back toward home and family.
I should have said a whole lot more. I should have just put some stuff right in your face.
Were you taught to be silent?
I was, because
Was
what
it-
we
was it
do,
church?
it was a church thing, because
Okay.
what we do is this. Listen, you need to anoint every doorpost in that house. Go through his closet, shut your mouth, and stay on your face.
She believed that facing a life-threatening medical situation would lead to stronger emotional support and a renewed focus on their relationship. But according to Debra, the pressures of fame, touring, recording commitments, and career responsibilities continued to dominate everyday life. That realization hit hard because it forced her to consider a painful question. Were career success and family no longer being given the same level of importance within the marriage? As time passed, the emotional distance became harder and harder to overlook. Debra later said that one of the biggest challenges was the lack of meaningful communication. Important conversations often seemed to get postponed, interrupted, or pushed down the priority list as professional obligations kept demanding attention. What started as a concern gradually became a source of growing frustration and disappointment. Eventually, counseling became part of the effort to address the issues. However, Debra later acknowledged that consistency was difficult to maintain. She attended sessions for extended periods, but she also admitted that she was not always completely open during therapy because she feared revealing too much while she was still emotionally fragile and trying to make sense of everything she was feeling. What made the situation even more heartbreaking was that she still desperately wanted the marriage to succeed. According to her later reflections, she never wanted Bebe to view her as someone standing in the way of his success. Because of that, she often stepped aside, stayed quiet, and tried not to add pressure, even as her own concerns continued to grow beneath the surface. For years, Debra put her own needs aside because she did not want to be seen as an obstacle to Bebe's growing career. She made sacrifices, stayed supportive, and focused much of her energy on helping him pursue his goals. Meanwhile, Bebe Winans continued to thrive in the public eye as one of gospel music's most respected and recognizable stars. His career kept expanding through solo projects, acting roles, radio hosting opportunities, and award-winning performances. Alongside Bebe Winans, he helped achieve a level of crossover success that made gospel music history, with platinum-selling records and widespread recognition. To fans and supporters, everything appeared successful and steady. Behind the scenes, however, the marriage was facing challenges that were becoming increasingly difficult to overcome. Debra later shared that she had intentionally placed her own identity in the background because she believed supporting Bebe's ambitions was part of her responsibility.
There was no change. So then I started getting mad because y'all told me if I did A, B, C, and D, God was obligated to do A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. And I looked for it. I had an expectation. But how was I going to expect God to do something and I wasn't willing to do my part?
That's interesting. There was something that freed me up. God told me.
Over time, that choice took a deep emotional toll. After 16 years together, the marriage officially came to an end. Their divorce was finalized in 2003, closing a chapter that had defined much of her adult life and dramatically changing the direction of her future. Even though the legal process was complete, Debra later explained that the emotional struggle was far from over. In many ways, she felt the real battle was only beginning. Years of silence, disappointment, loneliness, and bottled-up emotions seemed to surface all at once, forcing her to face feelings she had pushed aside for a very long time. For years, she had convinced herself that quietly enduring pain was part of being faithful, supportive, and spiritually strong. But after the separation, she could no longer avoid the questions she had been carrying inside. The end of the marriage pushed her into a difficult period of self-reflection, where she began examining her identity, her faith, and emotional patterns she had accepted for years without fully questioning them. As Debra reflected on her life after the divorce, she began to realize just how much of herself had been lost inside the roles she had carried for years: wife, supporter, caregiver, and protector of someone else's public image. She also started recognizing how strongly church culture had influenced the way she viewed hardship, often encouraging endurance and constant prayer when deeper, more honest conversations were needed. One of the most significant turning points came during a trip to California after the marriage had already ended. Alone in a quiet hotel room, emotionally drained and spiritually exhausted, Debra reached a moment she could no longer ignore. The familiar religious phrases that had once brought comfort no longer seemed to provide the answers she was searching for. For the first time in years, she stopped relying on repeated spiritual sayings and began facing her situation with complete honesty. Sitting by herself with nothing but her thoughts, she started asking difficult questions she had avoided for a long time. She reflected on love, rejection, self-worth, and why she had invested so many years trying to save a relationship that, in her view, no longer felt emotionally connected. Those questions were painful, but they forced her to look at her life from a completely different perspective. That period marked the beginning of a major personal transformation. Debra later said she began questioning why she had spent so much time hoping for changes that could not be created by one person alone. She also reflected on what it meant to keep believing a marriage could survive when mutual effort and communication were no longer where she hoped they would be. According to Debra, that realization changed everything. She came to understand that much of her spiritual focus had been directed toward changing outcomes rather than fully confronting difficult realities.
So whenever you're praying and nothing happens, how many of you are praying and nothing is happening? If you're praying and nothing's happening, there is something out of practice.
There you go.
So we have to know when to pray and when to put a practice into
That's
play.
right. That's right.
And that totally changed my life. I'm praying about something, praying about something, praying about something, praying about something, and then there's no movement. I said, now wait a minute, something wrong somewhere. And 9 times out of 10 was something I needed to say, do, or something I need to say or do.
The healing process that followed was intense, painful, and deeply personal. She once described it as feeling like open-heart surgery without anesthesia, a powerful comparison that showed just how challenging that chapter of her life truly was. Years after the divorce was finalized, the the former couple found themselves at the center of a controversy that drew widespread public attention. In 2009, Bebe Winans was arrested following allegations connected to a dispute involving Debra and matters related to child custody. Reports at the time stated that an argument at Debra's Nashville home allegedly became physical, turning a private conflict into a highly public story. The news spread quickly across national media because of Bebe's respected reputation within gospel music and Christian entertainment. For many people, the situation was surprising. The Winans family had long been associated with faith, musical achievement, and strong Christian values. Suddenly, major headlines were linking one of gospel music's most recognizable figures to serious allegations, creating intense public discussion and debate. According to reports from that period, Debra alleged that during an argument involving visitation and custody arrangements concerning their children, Bebe pushed her to the ground. Bebe publicly denied the allegations and stated that the claims were not consistent with his character, values, or upbringing. As details emerged, opinions became sharply divided, and the case attracted significant attention from both supporters and critics. Some people stood firmly behind Bebe and defended him throughout the controversy. Others focused on Debra's account of events and the emotional struggles she later discussed publicly. The case remained a major topic of conversation for many observers as it moved through the legal process. Ultimately, the criminal charges were dismissed after Bebe reportedly completed counseling requirements associated with a pre-trial diversion agreement. Even though the legal matter was resolved, the controversy had a lasting impact on public perception and remained one of the most talked about chapters connected to the former couple's history. For Debra, the controversy became a turning point that forced her to publicly confront emotions she had kept buried for years. She later explained that she had remained silent for a long time because she believed many women in church communities were encouraged to endure emotional struggles quietly rather than openly discuss their pain. That realization stayed with her long after the marriage had ended and continued to shape the way she viewed her own experiences. As time went on, it became one of the key motivations behind the next phase of her life. Little by little, Debra began rebuilding her identity outside the enormous spotlight and recognition connected to the Winans name. For years, much of her energy had been devoted to supporting a gospel star, maintaining a public image, and carrying emotional burdens without drawing attention to them. Now she faced a different challenge, figuring out who she was as an individual without allowing the marriage to define her future. The process was anything but quick. It required years of healing, counseling, spiritual reflection, and honest self-examination. There were difficult moments, painful discoveries, and emotional hurdles that could not be solved overnight. Throughout that journey, Debra placed a strong focus on motherhood. She was determined to provide stability for her children and help shield them from the lasting emotional impact that public controversy, family conflict, and divorce can sometimes create. Protecting their well-being became one of the most important priorities in her life as she worked to build a new chapter for herself and her family. At the same time, Debra threw herself into ministry work and speaking engagements that focused on healing, emotional honesty, and rebuilding life after heartbreak. Drawing from her own experiences, she increasingly encouraged women to stop hiding emotional wounds behind appearances or expectations. She often spoke about the importance of addressing difficult conversations directly, rather than using faith as a way to avoid painful truths, personal growth, or accountability. One of the biggest turning points in her public journey came with the release of her memoir, Life Altered, Not Over: My Silent Journey to Wholeness. The book gave a voice to struggles she had kept private for many years. For the first time, she laid out the emotional challenges, disappointments, and lessons that had shaped her life behind the scenes.
I asked him these 3 questions. Number 1, what difference does it make who files for the divorce if the covenant is already broken? Number 2, why do I keep praying for you to turn the heart of a person who clearly wills not to turn? And number 3, what does it say about me that I am begging you to make a man love me?
What had once been a deeply personal struggle hidden behind church culture and a high-profile marriage was now being shared with a much wider audience. The memoir became more than just a book. It became her account of survival, self-discovery, healing, and personal transformation. During interviews promoting the project, Debra repeatedly made it clear that her purpose was not revenge or public payback. Instead, she wanted others to understand how emotional pain can quietly grow beneath respected titles, polished public images, and outward success until it begins affecting every area of a person's life. She also spoke candidly about the dangers of losing her sense of self within a marriage. Debra admitted there were periods when she barely recognized who she was outside the responsibilities of being a supportive wife and devoted mother. Throughout the 2000s and early 2020s, she continued creating a more private life centered on healing, personal growth, faith, and self-understanding rather than the spotlight and attention that once surrounded her world. Meanwhile, Bebe Winans continued building and maintaining a successful career in entertainment. He released new music, performed across the country, appeared on television programs, hosted radio shows, and remained a respected figure within gospel music circles despite past controversies. And so, discussions surrounding the divorce and later public disputes continued to be part of the broader conversation about his public image. By 2021, Debra's interviews presented a very different person from the woman she once described in earlier years. She appeared more confident, more self-aware, and more willing to openly examine difficult chapters of her life. During one particularly revealing interview, she explained that true healing required looking honestly at her own decisions and actions, rather than placing all responsibility on others involved in the situation. That sense of accountability became one of the most important parts of her message. Rather than portraying herself only through the lens of hardship, she spoke about the role that silence, fear, emotional dependence, avoidance, and certain beliefs had played in keeping unhealthy patterns alive. Her willingness to discuss those issues openly gave her story a level of depth that resonated with many listeners. For many women, Debra's reflections felt familiar because they touched on challenges that often remain hidden behind public appearances and private struggles. Her story sparked conversations about relationships, emotional well-being, communication, and personal growth in ways that extended far beyond her own experience. By 2026, Debra Denise Winans largely remained outside mainstream celebrity culture. However, her story continued to circulate through interviews, discussions about her memoir, church conversations, online forums, and social media debates centered on relationships, divorce, emotional distance, and the expectations that many women feel placed upon them within faith communities. In many ways, Debra's story became a powerful example of what can happen when fame, ministry responsibilities, church expectations, emotional silence, and unresolved personal struggles all collide within a marriage. What makes her experience so striking is that much of the pain unfolded far from public view. There were no constant tabloid headlines during most of the marriage, no reality show-style drama, and no weekly public confrontations grabbing attention. Instead, the difficulties developed slowly behind closed doors, while audiences continued applauding the image presented to the world. That contrast is a major reason her story still resonates with so many people years later. Beneath the gospel awards, church appearances, family legacy, and polished public image was a woman quietly questioning whether anyone truly understood what she was experiencing or saw the struggles she was carrying. As of 2026, Bebe Winans' estimated net worth is commonly reported to be between $4 million and $6 million, built through decades of music sales, touring, broadcasting, publishing, and other entertainment ventures. Debra Denise Winans' personal net worth has not been publicly confirmed, although her professional work has included ministry efforts, speaking engagements, writing projects, and her memoir. What keeps this story alive isn't just the fame or the headlines. It's the deeper conversation about identity, communication, faith, relationships, and the emotional struggles that can exist behind even the most admired public images. Debra's journey continues to spark discussion because it highlights challenges that many people quietly face but rarely talk about openly. What was your biggest takeaway from this story? Which moment stood out to you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with others who might find this story interesting. And be sure to turn on notifications so you never miss our next deep dive into the stories behind the headlines.